Hi, it's Carly here from Tribe. One of the things that I'm really inspired about working with the four of us at Tribe, myself, Prem, Damien and Tina, is that each of us has actually done a lot of work. We've done a lot of work in ourselves and have actually been quite serious spiritual practitioners for an extended period, each of us for about 20 years. And there's a lot of quite deep philosophical perspectives that each of us bring to what we're actually doing at Tribe. And it's not something that we reference a lot because I think it can just actually create confusion. But I do want to actually share some of my philosophical orientations around what we're doing for those people that are kind of interested in these things. So when I was 16 years old, I had a really powerful mystical experience, and it really set me on a very strong trajectory in my life of studying a lot of personal growth and doing spiritual work. And a core part of all of that study and practice for me has been the practice of non-dual forms of spirituality. And so non-dualism is a pretty kind of prevalent philosophy, non-dual meaning not two, right? So it really looks at reality as inherently connected. It's all one, right? Oneness is kind of the key tenet of non-dualism. And generally in non-dual philosophies, the key injunction is about identifying with awareness and realizing that all is actually awareness, all is actually consciousness, and that it's actually our sense of separateness to that awareness that everything is, that's the core of our kind of issues, the core of our delusion. Or another way of saying this, it's that our sense of ego, it's a sense of our identification with our mind and our body, our thoughts, our feelings, our bodies. That's kind of like the heart of the problems that we have. And if instead that we can pay attention to and identify with the part of us that is witnessing all of these things, that witnesses our thoughts and our feelings and our bodies, then this is actually the truth of where reality really resides. And I personally found practicing this kind of perspective and living out of this perspective like a super liberating, expansive, enlivening place to live out of. Because as soon as I don't actually identify with the elements of my experience and instead can be in the witnessing place of it, it creates detachment, right? So now I'm not in this place of being attached. I'm not personalizing my experience. As soon as I personalize my experience, there's kind of a sense of contraction around that experience. I actually prefer the word self-contraction over ego, right? Because it's this kind of contraction where I'm like, in a sense, I'm like taking my experience overly personally, right? So my thoughts and my feelings, and if they're mine, then it's kind of like painful if those thoughts and feelings kind of, are kind of not going my way or whatever it is, whatever, my way actually means, right? So I highly encourage people generally to practice this, and it's a really interesting perspective to start practicing, right? To not actually personalize my experience. Okay, yes, there's thoughts and feelings arising in my field of awareness, but they're not kind of actually mine. They just happen to be in my awareness, and so then I can just kind of watch them and be detached and enjoy just the experience of these things arising. And if it's not kind of me, then it doesn't really matter if these kind of thoughts are arising in my experience, they're just occurring. So I think this is a super, super powerful perspective to be in the practice of. Now, a lot of schools of mysticism, they look at life, the world, all this experience, ego, it's all this kind of illusion. And it's if we get too distracted by that illusion, then, that's our issues. And then from that kind of perspective, the goal in a sense is just to kind of get out. The goal is to stop identifying with these things, to actually reorient our awareness towards awareness itself. And then from that place, we're free. And I think that's totally true. I think there's so much freedom in that place. I think there's a danger in this perspective though. And I think it's a danger of disassociation in particular. So there can be an orientation on that perspective that actually, in a way, has me start to deny my experience. like, okay, if these thoughts and feelings, aren't me, well then they're just something that's a distraction. I'm just going to like not pay attention to those things, right? And of course, the big danger with disassociation is that the energy that we're like disassociating from, it's still there. The thoughts and feelings are still there. There's still like energy in our system that's actually impacting us. And if we start to deny that energy in some form, it's going to come out in different ways. And I think there's a lot of this in the spiritual world. There's like a term for it, spiritual bypassing, right? Where I actually start to bypass important elements of my experience because I'm like in some sense of denial of it. And it's like really saddening to me. Like there's actually a lot of, I think, abuse in spiritual communities, and there's like so many examples of teachers actually being people committing these abuses. And I attribute a lot of that to essentially spiritual bypassing and a sense of disassociating based on cultivating these types of awarenesses. So someone that I've been hugely impacted by here is the famous Indian mystic Triibe.Earth, who I think is just like such a wealth of philosophical insight. And Triibe.Earth's perspective was that this identification with awareness is actually only the first step towards spiritual liberation, right? So some people see that as a goal, where it's like I'm just going to kind of deny, disidentify with my thoughts and feelings, the ego, dissolve the ego, and then I'm free, right? For Triibe.Earth, that was just the beginning, right? So once there is this kind of new identification with some kind of sense of witnessing awareness, that witnessing awareness then can actually start to have an active influence on who we are, an active influence on transforming our thoughts and feelings and in a sense, what our sense of self is, right? And this has been a perspective that's hugely influenced me. So I think a lot of people, like when they start practicing witnessing style of awareness, it's like a passive kind of thing. It's like, if I'm not my thoughts and feelings and I'm just witnessing them, then just whatever is occurring is occurring. I'm not involved with that. Awareness just is. It's just witnessing. And there's a certain truth to that. But I think there is also an active component of awareness, right? So this detachment, this disidentification with our mind and our body, what it actually does is it frees us up to actually be in a lot more intimacy with our experience. If I'm not my thoughts and feelings, well, then I can create a lot of space for them. I can reside in the emptiness that is awareness, and in that space of emptiness, now I have the ability to embrace to a whole different level. I can radically accept what my experience actually is. Now my thoughts and feelings, if they're thoughts and feelings of pain or being critical or whatever it is, I can make those thoughts and feelings okay. They're not me, so I'm not kind of had by them. And so in this kind of radical embrace, this radical welcoming of what is, now we can be in so much more intimacy of our own experience. We can be in a lot more intimate connection with reality. And of course, to me, this is the kind of irony of like non-dual philosophies, right? Non-duality means it's all one. So if it's all one, that includes our thoughts and feelings. That includes our body. That's all part of consciousness as well. So it's there's this kind of contradiction to me around people who, from a non-dual point of view, start to deny the experience, because then I'm like also denying part of reality, right? So if instead I have this attitude from detaching that lets me actually really come into intimate contact with my experience and embrace it with this kind of radical sense of acceptance, now there's like this way of being with myself where I can let life move through me in a whole different way. I can welcome whatever thoughts and feelings that I'm having and kind of listen to the movement of life in those thoughts and feelings. And of course, this is where, in a sense, kind of the masculine and feminine poles of experience start to combine. So masculine being the kind of Shiva awareness-based aspect of reality, and then the immanence of experience itself, kind of thoughts and feelings and so on, being the feminine pole of consciousness, right? So now I've got this like strong sense of awareness. Now I can actually embrace the feminine pole of consciousness a whole lot and actually be in that kind of sense of intimacy. So from that kind of place of radical welcoming, it actually essentially lets me start to come into a whole different place of a wholeness in myself. I can include all elements of my experience, and in that inclusion, I can start to come into a different kind of sense of coherence and harmony in my experience. Now I can, maybe there's like some kind of fear that I'm feeling, and I can welcome that fear, and in the welcoming of it, kind of any energy that might have been stuck in my resistance of it can start to actually be released, and I can start to integrate the energy of that fear, such that it has me, whatever it might be, protecting myself more easily, or grieving maybe why the fear got stuck, because it was like actually imprinted in me from a place of early childhood, or whatever it is. And so as we start to embrace all these movements of life, aliveness starts to flow through our beings a whole lot more. We start to come into this place of coherence and harmony in ourselves, and all the kind of different parts of our experience in a sense, start to kind of connecting together into a larger kind of dance of who we actually are. And this is then where the kind of paradox of self starts to arise, right? So as all of these different parts of me come into more coherence, the expression of who I am starts to become more congruent, and essentially I'm starting to express myself more authentically from that place of congruence. And so there's a big paradox here in that if I'm not identifying with my experience, and instead I'm identifying with awareness and a sense of witnessing consciousness, and I'm just surrendering to the movement of aliveness in me, and yet that aliveness comes into this place of coherent and harmonious expression, there's like a stronger expression of self, even as I'm not identified with that sense of self. It's just so super interesting to me, right? So this kind of surrender, actually, and disidentification can actually create a stronger expression of who we actually are. And most of the framing that we do in the work we're doing at Triibe is actually about the development of our authentic sense of self. And I think that's kind of what more people relate to, which is why I don't tend to reference these kind of more mystical orientations. And yet, to me, like the deeper, more kind of advanced versions of what we're actually about at Triibe is cultivating this sense of surrender, such that which is ultimately what creates an authentic sense of self. So it's kind of, there's this paradox of like having no self is actually what creates a stronger sense of self. And from this kind of view that it's kind of ultimately radical acceptance, that has us come into this kind of intimate contact with our experience and intimate contact with life. It's actually the issue is it's our resistance to life. It's the places that we're resistant, we're not able to actually fully welcome our experience, that causes stuckness, and it causes kind of energy that we can't actually have move through us. And if instead we are able to be in this kind of radical embrace, then we're not going to have kind of repressed energies that are kind of coming out in unhealthy, dysfunctional ways, and we can actually be in the healthy version, the healthy expression of whatever the energies actually are. And from this place, all the energies in us actually have a purpose. Selfishness has a purpose. In the larger coherence of our being, if we in the radical acceptance of all of it, all the movements in us, it has a purpose. If I'm including the acceptance of where I want to be in service and where it's important for me to give, and if I'm in the acceptance of my own sense of selfishness and where actually part of what my being includes is like egocentricity. It includes places where I have like desires which are just about me, and it's in the integration of these places that we come into this harmonious expression of who we are. And then it's in this place of it being in the practice of welcoming all of it and surrendering to all the movements of life in us, that to me relational work really becomes like an amazing place of transformation. And I've become so enamored with relational forms of spirituality in the last few years, and I think it's like one of the most transformative places we can apply this kind of practice of non-dual kind of awareness. Because relationships, like they're hard, they're triggering. I think it can be quite easy to go and sit in a cave for how many years? Well, I wouldn't say maybe easy, but it's certainly easy doing that to cultivate this really expanded awareness. But then there's the stories of people coming back from their kind of these kind of cave type experiences with exalted awareness, and then as soon as they come back into contact with people, and particularly family, they're kind of back again into these kind of triggered states, you know. And it's through the contact that we have with other people that I think we really get highlighted, you know, places where there's stuckness in us, you know, there's places where we get triggered. In a way, such a gift in relationship is actually the way in which we trigger each other, particularly if we have a certain level of detached witnessing awareness that we've cultivated, because then we can actually embrace the triggering that occurs a whole lot more, and then use it to realize where there's parts in our being that we actually haven't allowed the movement of, and where that energy can come into greater coherence and expression within our being. So I hope some of you have found this valuable. It's kind of been a bit of a philosophical ride. I'd love to hear what kind of thoughts this has sparked in you. And I'd love to also keep sharing a little bit of just some of the larger kind of spiritual, philosophical orientation that I have around the work that I'm doing, and just the kind of this place of being in surrender and radical acceptance and intimacy in our relationships to ourselves and our lives in general. Thank you.